Hey everyone, good to see you guys. Just arriving a few minutes before 9 a.m. For our Intro to Philosophy meeting today. Hope you guys are doing really good. Slept well, had a great long weekend. We'll be underway in a minute, 5 minutes. So for now, just I guess get comfortable and get your viewing set up the way you like it, and I'll be right with you guys. Arnold Palmer, get the day started. Okay. Hello, everybody. Good morning. Good morning. Hey there. Good to see you. Anybody who's arriving to the meeting, feel free to say hi, but I guess in a few minutes we'll get a lot more numbers, so I guess I'll wait and hold off. Good morning, guys. Hi. Good to see everybody. Lauren, Lily, Paige. Appreciate you guys. Hello, hello. Daddy. My cats are running around. Oh, that's kind of cute. Hi, guys. Hi, Celine. A couple more minutes, and we'll get going. Hi, Senna. Hi, Megan. All right, almost ready to get started. Just another minute or so. Hey there, Kelly, and everyone else. Welcome to class. Welcome to our meeting. Nice to see everybody. Hey. I check my emails every day, all day. What's up, Celine? Did you send me a message? Let me know. if that's the case. Why do you ask? I do check it every day. I have a policy of getting back to a student within a 48-hour window. Usually it's within 24 hours at the most, but why do you ask, Celine? Did you send me a message? Everybody, hi, good morning. It's 9 a.m., so welcome back to class. I'm going to get rolling into our topics of philosophy of religion. But Celine, I'm taking your question. You want to follow up with me here? Oh yes, I check them all the time. So send me an email after class and I'll definitely get you a response this afternoon. I try to check them at every opportunity, but I have some meetings this morning from 9 to 9:50 this one, then 10 to 10:50. I have something else at 11:30, so I'll probably not get to reply until around 1:30 or so, but I'll definitely check it by then. So not to worry. Everyone should know that I'm always checking on those messages, so feel free to send me them at any time. Thank you. And good morning to everybody else. Thank you for all those who've said hi. Hope you're doing well and had a great long weekend. Enjoyed the Labor Day. But here we are back, and so we're going to continue going through some more of our topics on the philosophy of religion. So what I want to start off with is just kind of reviewing the major concepts from the last lecture, and then we'll press forward through the notes as far as we can with the schedule today. So overall, we're studying philosophy, the love of wisdom, which touches on any number of different topics of deep human significance and interest. The first subject that we're looking at is the philosophy of religion, in which we're going to try and examine arguments for the existence of God, criticisms of those arguments, and everything in between. So as we So just a few quick words about it, because that's still on our mind for today's meeting too. So the ontological argument, just a quick recap. It came to us around 1,000 years ago from this man named Saint Anselm. Anselm was the Archbishop of Canterbury. He lived in the 11th century. He wrote a book called the Proslogion in 1077. And in that book, there's this argument written, which is called the ontological argument. Okay, so does anybody have a really, I don't know, general summary of the idea of the argument? Like, can anyone put it in a few words if possible, just so I can see that it's coming through to you? Who could throw that out at me in the chat? Like, how does Anselm try and prove the existence of God? What is his major, claims, and how does he get to that conclusion? Let's just see how you put it, if anyone has a chance to say it, and then I'll, expand on whatever I see you put in there. Even if you have a couple of thoughts, even if it's not the full-blown argument, just some essential items from the argument that you could say, that you could clearly state. Okay, Evis. So since God is the greatest concept imaginable, yes, he has to exist in both the mind and reality. Since existing in both is greater. That's very good, yes. And Paige, also correct, you're referring to the method used, which is reductio ad absurdum. Suppose God didn't exist in reality. In that case, he wouldn't be so great. But he's defined as the greatest conceivable thing. So he's got to exist in all these ways, existing in the mind and in reality. Okay, good, exactly. I mean, that's pretty much it. He says God's definition is greatest conceivable being. Everyone knows that, even atheists. Some things only exist in the mind, though. But God's too great to only exist in the mind based on that definition, because it's greater to exist in the mind and in reality. So he really must exist in both. So that means that he can't even be thought not to exist, because if he could, then that would be imperfect. And when and if anybody says they don't believe in God, they must not even be really thinking about God himself, because it's not possible to think of God as not existing, since he's too great for that. Okay, so that's the basic argument. And then we look at objections to the argument. So we've so far covered two objections. One was from the monk Gaunilo, and the other was by the British philosopher G.E. Moore. So that's as far as we got last Friday. So Gaunilo's criticism is essentially to say that this methodology of argument really is not going to work, because if you see how it is used in the case of God, the same strategy could be used to try and prove the existence of things that are certainly not real. Like, for example, he gives the case of a lost island. He says, imagine something, we'll call it the lost island, and it's the greatest conceivable island. Okay, is it in your mind? Sure. But wouldn't it be ridiculous to say, oh, well, it has to also exist in reality, because the definition of it is greatest conceivable island. And it wouldn't be so great as you could conceive if it didn't actually exist. So what? This means it really exists? Clearly, that's a ridiculous conclusion to reach, because we know it's not such a thing. Therefore, whatever method argument that Anselm uses has problems, because the same type of tactic can be used in an effort to attempt to prove the existence of things that are known to not be real, like the case of the island, which is an analogy to his definition of God. Okay, so then it was G.E. Moore, last little review. G.E. Moore, what was his position? That existence is not a predicate. Now that takes a little explanation. So basically, predicate is like a attribute of something. If I say that the leopard has spots, the leopard is the subject, and having spots is the quality or the feature that is predicated of that subject or attributed to that subject. So predicates are just features of things, attributes of things. Therefore, what he's saying in this argument is that existence is not a feature, it's not an attribute. And that's where he thinks that Anselm went wrong. Because in Anselm's argument, the definition of God implies that this being is the greatest thing you could conceive of, so he would have to have every perfect quality, and existence is one of those qualities too. But Moore says that's incorrect. Existence is not actually an attribute, it's not a predicate, in other words. The way that he tries to show this is that he uses the comparison of two different sets of sentences. The difference between the two groups being that a predicate, growl, is swapped out for the word exists. Okay, so when you substitute the predicate growls for exists, the new sentences that result from the substitution don't really make much sense, at least most of them don't. So like, for example, most tigers growl. Okay, that means more of them growl, fewer of them don't. But most tigers exist can't be analyzed, because it would have to, I guess, mean something like most tigers do exist and then a smaller quantity of them don't. But we cannot determine the groups or numberings of things that on the one hand do exist and on the other hand don't. So it's kind of just meaningless to use the word as a predicate. We see it also with the negative form of the expression. Some tigers don't growl, that's fine. But some tigers don't exist just leaves us scratching our head wondering what that means. Okay, now with that in place, I guess let's continue. I have another little objection to the Anselm argument that is from our textbook that we want to read and talk about. So let's just go on to talk about the work of William Rowe. Once we finish up this article of Rowe, then we're done with the ontological argument for now, and then we're going to move on to talk about other philosophical arguments for the existence of God that are also powerful and much discussed. So William Rowe, for now, his article is just called "Why the Ontological Argument Fails." Why does the ontological argument fail, according to him anyway? Let's see why. And I'm just going to write a little information about who he is. So this is an article that he wrote in 1993. And this is a philosopher who's, recently retired from Purdue University in 2005, but relatively recently, within, a generation. We're looking at long time scales. So that's recent in the big historical sense. So yeah, he's not a person who believes in God, and he thought that this argument was not a good argument and it didn't work. So he has some problems to mention and to show in the essay here. So why does he think the ontological argument fails? The basic big picture, and I'll just kind of say this and then we'll fill in the details. The big picture for him is that just by defining something as existing, that's not enough to prove that it really does exist. Because after all, we can define words however we like. So suppose that I define a non-existent thing as existing. That doesn't change the fact that it does not exist. So what he thinks is that the ontological argument is kind of just a sophisticated piece of wordplay, because the whole argument is based on the definition of the word God, and the author tries to build a bridge from the definition to some established existence in reality. What Rowe thinks is that you can never establish that something is real in the actual world just on the basis of how the word that refers to that thing is defined. So you basically can't just prove that something exists by only just defining it as existing. Sorry, 1 second here. Yeah. Sorry, my phone, I had to turn off the vibrate. So why then does the argument fail? Here's a good way of putting it. going to erase the title and information on the author. Sorry, I skipped to the wrong part of the note here. Okay, yeah, so what he thinks that Anselm has done is basically define God as existing. Like here is his kind of oversimplified analysis of Anselm, that Anselm defines God like this: God equals existing perfect being. So he says, okay, well, Anselm shows up and he just says, here's a definition of God, perfect being that exists. And then if you try to disagree and say, I don't know if God exists, or I don't believe God exists, it's like he says, aha, I can't say that because it's right there in the definition. So, if you say that he doesn't exist, it's like you're just contradicting the definition itself, which is illogical. But here's the problem to Rowe. Merely defining something as existing cannot really prove that it actually does. So to make this point in more detail, he gives us an example to consider. It's kind of a weird example a little bit, but we got to work with what we're given by these authors. So I'll use his example. I'll try to explain what he's saying. Then I'll offer you an alternative to his example that I kind of just think is maybe easier to understand. And then we'll be done with this row. So, okay. He says, consider this example of two made-up words. So we're talking here about two just completely invented words, but we're going to stipulate what they mean and what their definition is. So one of these two words is the word magican. And the other one is the word magico. Okay? A magican is an existing magician. And a magico, what do you think it is? It's a non-existing magician. Okay? Now, so these are two different types of magicians, so to speak. This is not a typo that is spelled that way here. Magican, it doesn't have the I in between C and A there. Magican means existing magician. So magicans and magico are both magicians. It's just that the magican ones are the ones that do exist or have existed, and the magico ones are ones that never really existed. So I'm going to divide these two categories, and let's just try to come up with a couple of examples here if we can. Who are some people who've ever, lived or still live, and their job is that they do magic tricks and they're performers of magic tricks? Like, who are such people, real life flesh and blood people that either are alive today or who have at least lived and walked the earth at some point in time? So I'm asking you for some examples of magican. Who could give me some of those? I'm sure there's a few that we all know, but who could be some? Okay, David Blaine. Didn't he recently float on helium balloons over the desert or something? Yeah, he does a lot of weird escape artist type tricks and stuff. Sometimes I wonder, how is that a magic trick? But anyway, yeah. So then you got Houdini. Houdini, the very famous Harry Houdini, well known to a lot of people. Houdini died performing some type of trick, but it wasn't like his best trick. He said, "Punch me in the stomach," to random, spectators. The whole point was that he was supposed to brace his stomach so that he could sustain whatever the punch was. Somebody hit him with the sucker punch too quick, so it actually hurt his internal organs. He died that way, but not related to our lecture. Anyway, Chris Angel. Okay, good. And there's more. We could just go on and on and on, but you get the picture. You understand. On this side of the ledger, we've got all the magican, existing magicians. Now, over here, let's think on this side. What are some examples of fake, not fake, I shouldn't say the word fake, but fictional magicians that are never been real people, from movies, from fiction, non-existing magicians. What could be some examples of those, if you can think of any? Harry Potter, that's a good one, right? Yeah, Harry Potter and wizards and stuff. Obviously just a fictional character. Yeah, there's Harry Potter, so I got a few of those. Any others that come to mind? I know a few more myself, but let's see what is on your mind. Characters from Now You See Me, sure, yeah. So like characters from any fiction universe, whether it's like Merlin, you know, like from the old Knights of the Round Table, that's just fables and stuff, or depending on how you define magician. I mean, Gandalf, I guess, you know, from like Lord of the Rings and stuff. And we could continue to go on and on, but here we see the difference now. So Magic Can on this side, these are existing magicians, these are non-existing magicians. Okay, so now here's where the argument kind of kicks in. The author Rowe is saying this. Now imagine, if you can, suppose that the world we live in had never actually had magicians. Okay, we do, people like that. But suppose that we took a different track of history, you know, a different timeline of history. So I'm asking you to think about what's called a counterfactual. Like, so contrary to fact, imagine that there never really had been any magicians, okay? If that were so, couldn't we still have invented this word Magican, yeah? We still could have made up the word, and we would have been in a situation where there aren't any existing magicians, but nonetheless, the word Magican, by definition, means existing magician. So can't you see, therefore, that the word itself has no bearing on whether or not such things exist? Like if tomorrow all the people who practice magic tricks die or something, so there's no longer any existing magicians on the planet Earth, this word could still be discussed, it could still bear the same definition, okay? And in that situation, we would have a word which means existing magician, but there actually wouldn't be any such things in the world. So his point then is sort of like the word God is being compared by analogy to his invented term Magican. And so if in case there's no actual God in the world, then even if the word God means by definition being which exists, just including existence in the definition of the word cannot really prove whether the thing actually does exist. You know, so like in case there's no God, then the word God is kind of like Magican because it means by definition existing being that is perfect. But if in fact there is no such thing, then the word doesn't actually denote anything that exists in reality, okay? So by means of this example, he tries to showcase that the definition of a word, even if it means by definition existing such and such, including the word existing in the definition can't prove that it's real, okay? Let me read a little bit and you can see what he said on the same point. So he says, what we have just seen is that introducing existing or non-existing into the definition of a concept has a very important consequence. If we introduce existing into the definition of a concept, it follows that no non-existing thing could satisfy the concept. And if we introduce non-existing into the definition of a concept, it follows that no existing thing can exemplify it. But so no non-existing thing can be a Magican, and no existing thing can be a Magico. But, and here's the key, but must some existing thing satisfy the concept Magican? No. From the fact that existing is included in the definition of Magican, it does not follow that some existing thing is a Magican. All that follows is that no non-existing thing is a Magican. And now here's a very important sentence. If there were no magicians in existence, so that's where he's asking you to consider this counterfactual. If there were no magicians in existence, then there would be nothing to which the term Magican would apply. This being so, it clearly does not follow merely from our definition of the word Magican that some existing thing is a magician. Only if magicians do exist will it be true that some existing thing is a Magican. So do you follow the logic of this counter-argument? He's basically constructed an example of a word which imports existence into the definition. And he's trying to indicate to you that merely based on the word and its definition, we have not yet proven that such a thing exists. Now here's what I'll tell you, because there's one thing about his example that I can understand could be seen as a little bit confusing. And that's this. He chooses the example of a word that he makes up called Magican, existing magician. And it's perhaps a little confusing because there really are such people. You know, there is David Blaine and Houdini and David Copperfield and Chris Angel. Like, these are real people. So some student could have read this and heard my explanation and got lost and thought, well, I don't know, what does he mean? Like, there aren't such people, but there are. His point is not that magicians don't exist. his position is that they didn't have to exist just because the word Magican was invented out of thin air. If there hadn't been such people, or if there were no longer such people, then the word would still bear the same definition, and in that case wouldn't refer to anything. But I believe that the same point he's making can be perhaps simplified a little with a slight adjustment to his example. So I'm going to try and give you one second look at the same kind of example that he's giving here, but I'm going to modify the case. Okay, so imagine these two words then. We've got Unican and Unico. Now, based on what has just been presented, following along with the lesson, what do you think I'm going to tell you is the definition of the so-called word Unican? What do you think the word's meaning is in that case of the word Unican? I'm telling you that Unican is a word I just made up, and it means existing unicorns, correct? And then the Unico, obviously, is the contrary, so that would be the non-existing unicorns. Okay. Now, let's hold off for a minute on the Unican category for obvious reasons. But over here, Unico, unicorns from fiction. Now, there's probably not a ton of very well-remembered examples of fictional unicorns, non-existent unicorns, but maybe there's some that you have in your mind or in our collected memories in this class. You know, unicorn from stories or fiction or from pop culture. Any examples at all? I have a couple, but I want to see if you have any. I know that we don't spend probably a lot of time watching fiction or whatever that deals with unicorns, but there are some cases. So it's not important for you to remember or not know, but unicorn from Harry Potter, was there one of those? I guess so. I'm not 100% familiar with the whole film series, but if you tell me there was, then I agree. Or the Last Unicorn film, that's good too. So you're doing very well. Last Unicorn, unicorn from Harry Potter. There was also, so like years back, it's now already kind of old, but there was this Charlie the Unicorn, like internet meme or whatever. There's also, I believe, My Little Pony cartoons. I don't remember. Is it Rainbow Bright or something, or Rainbow Sparkle or something like that? There's one from that whole fiction universe. But anyway, you get the idea. There's been some like described cartoon and other fictional unicorns. Over here with Unican, though, is there anything that we can put on that side of the ledger? Is there anything that we can put in the side of existing unicorn? I hope you can understand that there's a very clear answer to that. And the answer is no. Nothing can be written here. Why not? How come I can't put any names on that side? Unlike in the case before with Magican. Well, the reason is perhaps obvious, yeah? You understand me? That the reason there's nothing I can write over here is just simple. It's because there's no such things as unicorns. There aren't any existing unicorns. Okay, but now what does the word Unican mean by definition? It means existing unicorns. So did I just prove that unicorns existed by making up a word? No, certainly not. Unicorns don't exist, even though the word Unican means by definition existing unicorn. So whether it's the word God or Magican or Unican, what he's claiming is that if you say by definition this is something which exists, it still may not really exist. With the word Unican, I have defined it as a unicorn which exists, but since there's no such things as unicorns, the word cannot possibly change that, and it doesn't prove anything. So is his counter-argument good? I don't know, but it's his counter-argument. What he's saying is that you can't prove something exists just by defining it as existing. He believes that's what Anselm has attempted to do with the argument for God, that he says God's definition includes existence within it. So saying that God does not exist is a contradiction in terms. But by analogy, Rowe says, well, words we can invent at will. Therefore, let me make up a word which means existing magician. And although there have been such people, the word by itself is not a proof of that. In case there never were or no longer were, the word would still retain its meaning, but it wouldn't correspond to anything that is real. And I just gave you this unicant example, which is an additional substitute for the author's chosen example, because I find, in my view anyway, that it's perhaps clearer, since with the word unicant, you don't have to, let's say, judge what would be going on in a counterfactual world where there weren't magicians. In our actual world, there are not unicorns. And so I think the example kind of pops, because you can see that just by use or coining of this phrase, no existence has been proven with concern to the so-called unicorns. Okay? So hopefully that's clear enough for you guys. I wanted to give you guys notes on the William Rowe. But now that we've finished up his topic and his discussion, we're all done with, for the moment anyway, the ontological argument. So we're going to move on, and we're going to start to talk about the next. Okay? At any point, though, as always, just always feel free to ask any questions or seek any kind of clarification. I'm always looking at this chat, so anything that you may need or want, do let me know. I'm always happy to expand or clarify any points. But here we go. We're moving into the next big argument for God's existence now. So there's many different arguments for the existence of God. There's not just the one. We're looking at some of the biggest, most powerful ones in history. So another case is what we call the cosmological argument. So now we're going to study another argument for God's existence. Really, each person has their own judgment, which argument they think is better or worse. In my mind, I find this to be one of the most sophisticated and compelling arguments for the existence of God. If I was the judge, I would think of this as a better high-quality argument than the ontological argument is. Because I'm sort of convinced by some of the criticisms of the ontological argument that it has problems. This one I find is a little harder to critique, but you'll come to your own conclusions yourself. So the cosmological argument is actually an ancient argument. It dates back thousands of years. There's written versions of it that go all the way back to the ancient Greeks, and in world cultures, there are even older versions of it that you can trace back thousands of years beyond that. So it's quite old, it's quite ancient. I'm teaching you about a version of it that was presented in the 20th century by an American philosopher named Richard Taylor. But just let's be clear, Richard Taylor didn't originally invent the argument. It's thousands of years old, but he does discuss it and present it for us in his own time. So we're looking at the version written about by Richard Taylor, American philosopher of the 20th century. He lived from 1919 until 2003. And so he lived from 1919 till 2003, and this article that he published came to us from 1963. So this is the dates of his life. This is the date of his publication of his discussion of this argument. Okay, so Richard Taylor's cosmological argument. First of all, the term cosmological, which is the title of the argument, kind of, or the name of the argument, it derives from the root word cosmos. Does anybody know what is the cosmos? Has that word in your vocabulary? Maybe somebody let me know if you have a sense of the meaning of cosmos. What is the cosmos? What is it? Anybody? Just to kind of break open this little discussion a bit. Jason, you're saying stars, and Megan, you're saying stars. I see that. You think of the cosmos as probably like the expanse of space that you see when you look up at the canopy of stars, which is true, but let's see if you have an intuition about this. Oh, there you go, Drew. The whole universe. Yeah, that's kind of what I was going to fish for next. I was going to say, well, are we part of the cosmos? Because if there were, beings anywhere else looking out at the world and the universe, we would be part of that canopy of stars and such like that they look out at. So yeah, the universe, the whole thing, the totality of all space and time, that's the cosmos. Okay, so we are in our little local part of the cosmos, you know, the solar system, part of the Milky Way galaxy, but it's a very big system. It's containing everything. So the cosmological argument is basically an argument which is probing this question: where's the universe coming from then? Like, where does it all come from? What's the cause of this entire big system of reality to ever exist in the first place? And as you probably can guess, the conclusion of the argument steers towards, well, God has to be the cause of everything. But you'll see how we get from the beginning of that question to the conclusion, okay? All right, so what Richard Taylor does to start off his discussion here is that he uses a hypothetical scenario which sometimes we call thought experiments in philosophy. Now, that's a trademark feature of philosophy, and sometimes, I don't know, people find it a little weird or unrealistic to be discussing these far-fetched scenarios, but the point is not that they be realistic. The point is merely that they are used to focus your mind on a specific type of concept or idea. So after all, this is philosophy where we consider arguments. So never mind the fact that some of these examples are weird and unrealistic. That's not the point. The point is merely that they illustrate for us conceptual facts and truths. So here's a scenario for you to consider. It's a hypothetical. You imagine that you're walking around and you're taking a nice stroll in the woods. Okay, so you're walking in the woods. This is you. And then as you're walking through the woods, you come across something that's not typical to see there. What you noticed as you were on your little walk was a big sphere. Okay, so there's a sphere in the woods. Here is the light that shines off the curved surface of the sphere. Just to show you my artistic flair. Anyway, there you are. You walk through the woods and you see a whole bunch of normal wooded area stuff like trees, bushes, little creatures, normal to see in the woods. But this big sphere is kind of totally out of place. It's something that you'd never usually think to see in such a remote, natural setting. Okay, now, in case that you had such an experience, what do you think would be like a normal person's response, at least for a moment in their mind, upon seeing the sphere? Like, what do you think would be a typical natural human reaction to that as you walk around and you're on your little nature hike? What do you think might be your response? Okay, good, Eva. Where did this come from? That's exactly right. You'd probably think, whoa, like, what is this? That's not normal. And at least for a moment, your mind would probably pass over the thought, I wonder how that got here, or what is the cause of the sphere that I'm looking at? What is the origins of the sphere? Now, you're not going to investigate it. You're not going to know the answer. You're not going to be able to get the answer. Where does it start from and how did it arrive at the forest? But it's a typical thought that you would have because a human being, of course, has natural curiosity about things that are out of place. It would be a kind of weird, I think, individual who would see the sphere as they walk through the forest and have no reaction, just completely unfazed. Like, oh, sphere, yeah, it's in the forest. I'm walking. That's normal. Most people, at least for a split second, would be like, strange. Okay. So this reaction of curiosity that's triggered by the sight of the sphere in our example, what's the reason it seems strange? Because it's not in its normal place. It's something that's unusual to see there. Now, if you saw a tree or something in the forest, you probably wouldn't have that same type of quizzical reaction, like, tree, how did that get here? Where did it start from? So it's only the familiarity or lack of familiarity of an object in a given setting that triggers this kind of curious, inquisitive response. But now, here's a new point that he makes subsequent to that. Even though that type of response is more normal when the thing's unusual, can't we ask the same type of questions about things that are even in their everyday normal place? Like, couldn't we ask about like the refrigerator in your kitchen? Where did it come from? What is its ultimate origin? Couldn't we ask about the glasses that you see me wearing here? The professor's glasses, I wonder how those things started and what is the cause of their existence if we go back to the beginnings. Could we ask the same questions about basically anything, even normal things that are in their regular place? Could we do that? Yes. Why don't we? Because when the thing is where it's supposed to be, we don't find any reason to question how it got there or what it's doing there. So if you walk through an art gallery, like a contemporary art museum, and you saw something like this on one of the gallery floors, that would be something that would be normal to see in such a position. And therefore, you might not stop to have the same questions, like, well, what caused that to be here? But seeing it in the forest, it would be out of place, and thus that would be the typical reaction. Okay, so all that I've tried to show you so far is that in this hypothetical of the sphere, it's a weird thing to see there, and it would trigger curious questions, at least for a moment, as to where it came from. The next point is that the same type of curious questions could actually be asked about normal stuff in its everyday place. We're just not in the habit of doing that because we're accustomed to seeing them there, right? Now, this leads us to the appreciation of an important principle, which is one of the major levers of the argument. This entire setup to the beginning of the paper is to get us to this principle, which he calls the principle of sufficient reason. So, next point is to illustrate this principle. So the principle of sufficient reason. Okay, so before I write it here, though, let me ask one more little question about the sphere example. Whether it's a sphere or any of the other examples that I mentioned, my glasses, your refrigerator, you know, this computer, whatever that you're watching this on, whatever the example is, if you have that thought or question, where did it come from? Isn't it true that there's an answer to that question even if you don't know it, right? Like this device that you're watching the lecture on right now. Doesn't it have to have some origin, even if you right now don't know the exact specifics of it, right? Isn't that a fair statement? Do you understand what I'm asking you? Like, although you perhaps don't know the factory, the assembly line, the raw materials, where they came from that generated this object that you're looking at, doesn't it have to actually have, in fact, some origin or cause, even if it's unknown to you? Isn't that true? What do you say? Do things have to have an origin, like the sphere, for example, even when you're not yourself presently aware of what it is? Yes, obviously. All things which exist have to have been caused by something that initiated their existence. So keep that in mind, and that helps us to illustrate this principle. The principle of sufficient reason just distills these early remarks into a succinct statement. And what it says is that in the case of any positive truth, there is some sufficient reason for it. In other words, there is a cause or an explanation for every fact. Okay, so okay, and so I'm going to put it a second way, just subsequent to that. In other words, there is a cause or explanation for any fact. All right, so that's the principle of sufficient reason. Let me break it down for you a little more. So, positive truth. First of all, what's a positive truth? A positive truth is that something does exist. A negative truth would be the statement that something does not exist. Now, at least concerning the positive truths, they are the type which definitely have to have some cause behind them or an explanation. So like the fact that this computer you're watching this lecture on exists, since it exists, it has to have some cause. A thing that does not exist, though, doesn't have to have an explanation. So the principle only applies to the positive truths. Like, look around the room you're in right now. I'm guessing that there's no rhinoceros there. But the fact that there is no rhinoceros, which is a negative truth, like there is not one there, that doesn't have to have an explanation. But if there was a rhinoceros, then of course that thing has to have some original cause. So anyway, when something exists, read, that's what a positive truth is, then that thing has to have some kind of reason that explains why it exists. In other words, there has to be a cause for it, some explanation for it. Okay. Now, this is leading us closer and closer to his ultimate conclusion, but we're taking it step by step. So the next step of his argument actually involves the discussion of two types of truths, okay? So we have to put those on the table now. Okay, so here we have two categories of truths, two types of truth. Okay, now this is terminology that's known in logic, philosophy, metaphysics. So there's these two types of truths. One type is what are called contingent truths. And then the other kind are known as necessary truths. So first off, these contingent truths. These are things that are true, but they could have been false if circumstances had played out differently. So things that are true could have been false in different circumstances, okay? Now, necessary truths, on the other hand, these are things that are true, but the difference here is that these necessary truths are things that could not even possibly be false. Not even in theory or not even in principle could they be false. So necessary truths, things that are true, and could not possibly be false. So it's necessary that they're true, not just possible. Okay, so let me hear if you can think of some examples of contingent truths. We're going to talk about examples of each first. So contingent truths, this is something that I hope will be not too hard to come up with, because all you got to think of are things that are true, but it's within the realm of possibility that they could have not happened if things had played out differently. So who could think of some good, interesting examples, or any examples really, of some contingent truths? An example of a true fact, but it didn't really need to have happened. It could have happened otherwise. What could be some examples? I want to see if you can think through this, and I'll definitely help you with some if you need it. But let's see what the class has. So yeah, you being born, that's already a very interesting kind of trippy example, right? Trump's election, fair example as well. Eva, you saying a rock is warm, very close to the textbook's own material. I remember that example from the essay. Getting an A in a class, sure. All these are good examples. So let me go with some of the examples that I see written here right now. So Anthony's example, you being born, right? You are alive, you exist, which I'm very happy about. That's true, okay? But you didn't actually need to have been born. If your parents hadn't met and conceived of you, then you wouldn't be here right now watching this lecture. And the same, of course, is true of me. I mean, I was born back in the day, but if my parents didn't have that chance meeting, then of course I wouldn't be here teaching this lecture. So my existence, your existence, and the existence of any human person is a contingent truth. Things that happened to play out that way, but you know, destiny, fate, whatever, could have taken a different track. Trump's election, yeah, the results of any election, sporting match, or anything else, those are contests in which either outcome is possible until it's over. So Trump, I guess, won, even though it was a close election and the popular vote went the other way. So certainly, if some of the swing states where the margins were small had voted slightly differently, then we would have been looking at a President Clinton right now. So Trump's election did happen, but of course, it wasn't necessary that it happened. It was contingent truth that it happened to play out that way. You know, the existence of the Chapman University, it hasn't existed for all of history. It was built, I think, sometime late in the 1800s and the 19th century. So if the charter had not been developed and if the funding did not happen, then it wouldn't have existed. The fact that it exists today is true, but any number of things could have happened to destroy it earlier or prevent it from ever having been established in the first place. You know, so we could go on and on and on. Let's see, last year the Toronto Raptors won the NBA title. Now, they were not necessarily favored to win at all because they beat the Golden State Warriors and whatever. Like, that might not have happened if some of the events in the playoffs had played out differently. Maybe if, I don't know, Kevin Durant didn't, you know, tear out his Achilles or something, then they would have had the I don't know, firepower that they needed to come out victorious. So, okay, examples of contingent truths, that's all those are. Now, necessary truths. These might take a little more mental gymnastics to think of for a moment, but once we have them, you'll understand them pretty well. Can anybody think of some statement or fact that's true, but it's not just a matter of chance or probability, it has to be true. It's a necessary truth. These take a moment of thought, but there's definitely some good examples that could be generated. Anybody have a thought? Necessary truth example? It's not something like an event that occurred but might not have occurred. So it can't be anything like that. What could you say? 2 + 2 is 4, very good. Yeah, stuff like that, exactly, Eva. It's mathematical, logical, or geometric, or trigonometric truths. So if I tell you that the interior angles of a triangle all add up to 180 degrees, that's a logical truth. That's something that's not a matter of probability, like saying what the outcome of a tennis match will be. It's something that has to be true. So 2 + 2 is 4, today, tomorrow, every day, for all time. That's necessarily true. It's not something that depends on contingent factors, or the number of sides of a triangle, or the fact that each point lying along the radius of a circle is equidistant from the center. You say that we breathe oxygen, it's true, but it's contingent though, because it's conceivable that universal history would have taken a different track. If it had, then perhaps we would be breathing carbon dioxide or some other type of, chemical in the air. Life forms could have evolved differently such that we sustain ourselves on other forms of the environment. So yeah, it's contingent, but only with regard to a very wide scope of possibility. Drew, flipping a coin will either get you head or tail. Yeah, but the coin in principle could land on its edge and rest at that strange balance point and not actually turn up either heads or tails. The coin could, as it flips through the air, get hit by a random burst of radiation, highly unlikely, but that could cause it to combust or explode and not have any face to show. So though I understand that in almost every case we could imagine it would land, necessary truths take us farther away from the realm of space and time into just the conceptual world of like shapes, numbers, and quantities. History books, no, that's exactly wrong. With history could have played out any different way. There might not have been an American Revolution if the monarch of England had crushed the rebellion. There might not have been victory by the Allies over the Nazis in World War II if the Axis powers had had more strength. So no, definitely. Everything in history is contingent, not necessary. Like your birth, remember, like the fact that you're born is a historical event. You might not have been born. Okay, so with the two cases, contingent and necessary truths, we can advance a little further with the argument. We're running low on our time today, but there's not much more to add. But there are a couple of additional steps. Let me just sort of preview the next few steps for you now, and then we'll pick right up with it at the beginning on Friday to get a little further ahead. So what he's going to say next is that these contingent truths, for sure, are the kind of truths that the principle of sufficient reason does apply to. So if something's contingent, that means it didn't need to happen. And since it didn't need to happen, there must have been some cause or explanation that is sufficient to explain why it did occur instead of not. So takeaway, contingent truths have to have a cause or explanation according to the principle of sufficient reason that we just described. Now, the next part of the argument discusses that there is this one very big and basic truth that nobody can deny, and it is this statement or this fact, that the universe exists. See that? The universe exists. Now, can we all agree that's true? I hope so. I don't know how a person could think otherwise. I mean, you're a part of the universe, so if it didn't exist, then I don't know how you could think you exist. So the universe exists, but which kind of truth is this? Now, the author's claim, and what he thinks any of us would have to judge in agreement with him, is that the universe existing is a contingent truth. It's contingent. Though the universe exists, it's not inconceivable that it might not have existed. And that seems to be an idea that everyone more or less agrees with, whether you're a theist or an atheist. An atheist will say, well, the universe exists because of the Big Bang or something. But if the Big Bang didn't happen, then there wouldn't be a universe. So it's contingent. If you're theist, then you think that God is the cause of the universe. But if God didn't want to use his will to create it, then there wouldn't be a universe in that case. So the universe's existence seems to be contingent. That means that according to the principle of sufficient reason, this universe, the whole part, the whole everything, not just a part of it, if it's contingent that the universe exists, then here's the last question to end with our meeting today. The principle of sufficient reason would then imply what about the universe? If it's contingent, then it must have what? The existence of the universe, which is undisputedly true. According to this principle that he tried to articulate, that means the universe must have an origin, right? It must have a cause. There must be something that causes our universe to exist. And that leads us very close to the end of the argument, which I'll just save the ending for next time. But basically, since the universe exists and has to have a cause, his analysis is going to show that the only possible cause of the universe has to be something like a necessary being. It has to be God, because the universe can't cause itself. Nothing can cause itself. That doesn't make sense. Nor can something contingent cause the universe, because then that would lead to an infinite sequence of causes going to infinity. So since that's absurd also, the only possibility is that the universe is caused by something that's not itself contingent, a necessary being that doesn't depend on anything, but that everything else depends on. Okay, so you've heard, I think, the outline of the argument. I'm just going to try and summarize and recap the basic parts of it next time when we start up, and we'll continue through our syllabus and lecture notes. Next week, during the middle of the week, I'll give you guys your first essay prompts. But until then, just keep reading through the essays that we've designated in syllabus. And I guess I'll let you guys go on to your next classes and meetings for today. But have a good one. Thank you guys so much for your attendance and all your help this morning. And I'll definitely see you guys back on Friday, once again, same time and place, YouTube Live at 9 a.m. So thanks, everybody. Have a great day, and take care. I'll see you next time. Thanks.